Hello and welcome everybody to our new mini-series where we have the wonderful Igor Sushko, who is an American Bulldog breeder of over 22 years, with clients and people all over the world coming to seek out his expertise. I'm your host, Colleen Beasley, and I'm also joined by the wonderful founder of Joey's Legacy, Mr. Scott Fine. Scott, how are you doing tonight?
Hi, Colleen. Good. How are you?
Doing well, doing well.
This man is a walking encyclopedia of veterinary knowledge. It's very impressive, and I just can't wait to hear what he has to tell us tonight. Okay, Igor, it's all yours. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. So, yeah, we just had a pre-live chat real quick where another, related subject was brought up with regards to. So our subject today, topic today is going to be discussing, giving everybody that is a dog owner, especially. I mean, it's going to apply to cats probably the same way, but how to really filter out unqualified veterinarians in your area, in your geographical area, wherever you might live, so that you hopefully have somebody local to you that is a veterinarian. And the bar is really low, right? Like, as I've said, it's a matter of just trying to find a normal vet. Unfortunately, that's all we can even ask for. Of course, there are absolutely amazing veterinarians, but they're so far and few in between. You have to be just geographically very lucky and somehow manage to find them. But one thing is, I would highly discourage anybody from ever relying on recommendations from people, whether they be online or really, frankly, even your friends. The bottom line is that most owners, they may be going to the same vet for years, maybe even for decades, going through, multiple dogs' lives, and they settled into seeing that specific vet, and that vet might be nice, they might be kind, they might be friendly. None of those things make him a normal or a good vet. Most of the veterinary malpractice, I think, as we've covered in these previous sessions, an owner is highly unlikely to ever learn of that malpractice having taken place, ever. And so the dog owner is at such a huge disadvantage in this landscape of veterinary medicine. So there are some things that we unfortunately have to go through when we have a person picking up a puppy from us. We go online, and I look for veterinarians that are going to be local to their area. And this is, all over the country. We have owners. And so I have had a lot of just interactions and experiences with all these different vets. And the very unfortunate reality is that there are regions where, even cities that are not even that small, where I couldn't find one that would, fit our very loose criteria that we look for. Because we just want to match our owner with a veterinarian that is going to be just less likely to commit malpractice. At the end of the day, vets are human too, and even I think, I'm sure, like, even fantastic, excellent vets, sometimes they make mistakes. But it's a different thing to where comparing it to a veterinarian that does it every day to almost every dog they see, and they're not even realizing it. And so the reason I mentioned that, unfortunately, I preface it with unfortunately that we have to go through that, is because in a normal world, you wouldn't need to be doing that. You should have the confidence in a medical professional that is degreed and licensed and is employed to be able to care for your animal. So that is the unfortunate part. And there, with the first filter, the very first big filter that will filter out the vast majority of veterinarians, because we want to get down to we want to go through this process of finding a like hopefully a good vet, but even just a normal vet efficiently, right? So we want to minimize the amount of time that we're spending on that process, and we want to really narrow down the vets to, like, you know, 1 or 2 in your area. And the first one will filter out most vets, which is actually, there's a methodology for evaluating hip health through radiographs called PennHip. This is a set of x-rays that are taken by usually a general practitioner vet. Granted, like any kind of orthopedic specialist, orthopedic surgeon, for the most part, I think vast majority of those will probably be PennHip certified because it's their specialty in terms of the orthopedic stuff. But for the most part, you know, the overwhelming majority of vets that are certified in PennHip are going to be general practitioners, just because there are more of them. And the reason that we use that filter to where we want to find a veterinarian area that is specifically certified in PennHip in conducting this diagnostic set of x-rays is because, unlike, say, the OFA hip x-rays, the PennHip x-rays require that certification by the veterinarian. And it is something that a veterinarian essentially has to do and have an interest in doing out of their own volition. It will cost them a little bit of money. It will cost them, you know, given their schedules, considerable amount of time to go through that certification, including learning all the materials and going through a course, but also doing testing to where they would have to go through the procedure of taking these x-rays on a number of dogs and having those x-rays evaluated by the radiologist over at PennHip for them to be able to get certified. So it's a process that also takes, I think, at least a couple of months, generally speaking. And so it's an involved process. And the reason that we like to use PennHip as that first filter is because so far from what we've experienced in the US, generally speaking, a veterinarian that's certified in PennHip is just going to be a better general practitioner in everything they do. And it makes sense because they are doing something that they're not required to do, right? To get that certification. They're also interested in understanding that specific methodology and how it applies to the canine anatomy. And that in itself is also very, I think, important because this methodology is truly fantastic. It works as a methodology that can give you very good information regarding your dog's hips health. And hip dysplasia, of course, is one of the most common hereditary diseases that are just absolutely tragic in many instances. But it is hereditary, it's genetic. There's no other way around it. And of course, any veterinarian is going to be seeing such dogs quite a bit. Although you could say that, you know, with those kind of anatomical problems, you're probably going to be much better off going to a specialist. But having a veterinarian that is capable of taking those x-rays, if there's, for example, suspicion for hip dysplasia, as a general practitioner, right, they will be able to ensure you are going to that specialist that they would refer to you with already a diagnosed condition to begin with. But right, we use PennHip as a filter, not because it has anything to do with a dog having hip dysplasia. We use it because that will only limit vet sample that we're going to be looking at to vets that have a deeper interest in their profession, right? And thankfully, there's a website for PennHip. The entity that owns it is called Antec now. And if you just go on Google and search for the phrase "locate a PennHip vet," and PennHip is spelled PENNHIP, one word, you will immediately find that page where you will basically see a map of the US. You will enter either your address or your zip code, and it will show you results of veterinary hospitals that have a PennHip vet on staff. The one wrinkle we've run into with this is that database is not real-time updated. So their updates are not as frequent as they should be. So there's a lot of outdated information in the database. So until recently, most entries, or until recently, all entries would only show the hospital name and like their address or phone number. So you would have to call up that hospital and ask them who the veterinarian is that is PennHip certified. And with such calls, I've had answers to where, oh, we did have that person, but they left and they now work at another clinic. If they tell you something like that, ask them where, right? Because you want to, again, go through this iteration, this process that I'm going to be covering here for that specific veterinarian, because maybe they're still local to you. So recently, it looks like they are updating their system to where they're now beginning to list specific individual names of veterinarians within a given hospital. And there are definitely some hospitals that have multiple PennHip veterinarians on staff, which is actually going to be, I think, very important in terms of the selection. That should give you a little bit of more confidence that you're on the right track. And keep in mind, all these parameters that I'm going to be discussing today, none of them individually means the vet is going to be okay. Unfortunately, there's always going to be those exceptions. But as you start to layer them, some of these vets, they're going to keep falling off from your list to where hopefully you will end up with somebody. So one thing that I can say as a qualification for a vet, that in most instances should give you cause to start jumping up and down, is if you find a vet that is a breeder themselves. Such vets are extraordinarily rare, but they do exist. And it's actually pretty hard to find them. I don't think vets like to publicize that, maybe because of just like some, cultural controversy with that stuff in terms of breeding dogs. But it might take a bit of digging, but it would be a worthwhile endeavor to try to find through the grapevines if you have a vet that is a breeder that's in your area, because then the chances of that vet not being even just a good vet, but probably an exceptional vet, just skyrocket. The reason for that is that they will have a really strong grasp and expertise in the areas that specifically concern the health and well-being of your puppy grown up into adulthood, regardless of age of your dog that the vet might be seeing, from a perspective that is not, it doesn't appear to be taught in vet school. Things like understanding the development of the immune system, not just theoretically, but seeing that actually happen through iteration of the litters that they've had, how anatomies develop, what the risks are, and the approach of any vet that is a breeder that we have had experience with is essentially mirror image of our approach, right? Until we found a vet here in Las Vegas who fortunately happens to be a breeder, my wife would have very strong reservations and would have to continuously correct what the vet might be trying to do, anything the vet might be wanting to administer. Basically, she would override anything that the vet was trying to suggest or guess at. And she would, of course, always, you can rationally, if you know what you're talking about, you can always rationally explain it in very simple language. Because at the end of the day, none of this stuff is that complicated. If you have an actual understanding of the subject, right? And so with this vet that we now have, that is a breeder, right? We do have that implicit trust with her. And again, it still takes, even for us, right? It takes a number of different interactions with that veterinarian to really understand how it is that they work. And that's when the pieces sort of began to come together. It's like, well, yeah, given this situation, this is exactly, we're in complete agreement with this. We're in complete agreement with this kind of diagnostic plan. We're in complete agreement with this kind of medication. Whatever the situation might be, that makes total sense. And of course, we're also, as breeders, we also might have, certain situations rise with pretty young puppies. And I mean, basically, there aren't any vets that will deal with your 2-week-old puppy. They have no idea what they're looking at even. But if it's a breeder vet, they know. So it is highly unlikely you will find a vet that is a breeder, but if you do, chances are they're going to be PennHip certified. Right? All these things go hand in hand. So there is this very strong consensus with these approaches I've been talking about, even with regards to like veterinary malpractice and like what's right, what's wrong, how do you practice diagnostic method. This is not some kind of fringe thing, right? So people that really understand this stuff fundamentally, that have to deal with this with their own dogs, with their own pregnant dogs, giving birth to puppies, raising them. They understand how much damage certain medications can have on a given dog. And they're so conservative, right? We're always very, very ultra conservative with any kind of medication, so that once we are able to finally, through any kind of diagnostics, pinpoint what the given condition is, only then do we administer medication that is going to be specifically correct for that condition. So such vets, there's no guessing. They don't guess at things. And they will come up with a plan of, so we can go back to, like, for example, like doing a specific example that's probably like pretty common in dogs, right? Some kind of like skin inflammation, like paws or what have you, right? What this kind of a veterinarian would do is they could make some initial guesses in terms of what it might be. Like, this could be a bacterial infection, right? There's only a limited number of things it could be. It could be bacterial, fungal, viral. Viral is very rare for this kind of stuff specifically, but when you're talking about infection, there's only a limited number of infections: bacterial, fungal, viral, parasitic. Basically, that's it. So you have to then maybe prioritize these things, right? Because if it's a like some kind of redness or inflammation on the paw, you can pretty much exclude viral initially, because you will get a positive result for those other three somewhere. And so you would actually collect that specimen. You would collect a sample, do a skin scraping, right? Sometimes if it's some kind of like a weird growth or something, you would do a biopsy. If there's something to biopsy, you could biopsy. You could also culture fluids, right? If there's like gunk coming out of a wound, right? Those fluids can be cultured. And that it has to be sent to a lab, so that once you have a report, the vet should be sharing this report with you. This report from the lab will identify specifically the specific strain of bacteria that is pregnant, or the kind of fungus that is present, that they've grown basically in a petri dish from that sample that you sent them. And they will also provide a page, like 1-page long list that will show, but possibly like 24 different antibiotics, if the sample is positive for bacteria, that they tried based on the bacteria that they identified that should work potentially. But you will always see, nowadays, you will always see antibiotics that are supposed to work for the type of bacteria that it is, that don't. And each antibiotic on that list next to it will have either the S, I, or R letters. So S stands for susceptible, means this antibiotic works for this infection. I means intermediate. It means that there's some immunity that this bacteria is exhibiting toward this specific antibiotic, so it's not a good idea to use it. And R means resistant. It means that bacteria has grown to fight off this antibiotic that used to work on this bacteria in the past, but not anymore. So unless you have that specific culture report, you should not be giving your dog any kind of oral antibiotics or injection antibiotics that are systemic, right? Maybe you could potentially get away with some kind of topical ointment that could be like, for example, antibacterial and antifungal before you get that lab report. Although usually, sometimes it can take a while to get the report. Usually you should get any kind of bacteria stuff within several days. Fungus sometimes can take longer. So if it looks like there's going to be a long wait, and it doesn't seem like it's a good idea for the dog to wait until the results are in before you start medicating, then you don't do systemic stuff. Do topical medications that are going to be, pretty wide spectrum, and hopefully they'll alleviate that kind of thing. But you cannot bypass that culture, right? That is what the diagnostic method means. You have to diagnose the specific thing. So I've segued a little bit. With regards to so PennHip, once you have a list of veterinarians in your area that are PennHip certified, some things that I would look for our new owner, I would look on their website. Ideally, I want to see that the PennHip certified vet is not a new vet still, right? I mean, I think 15 years of experience, I think would be a good number to aim for. Of course, you may not be able to find one like that in your area, but try for one that's the most experienced, at least 10 years, 12 years. New vets out of vet school, even if they've been out, a few years, several years, they still have a lot to learn. Whenever, and this is the thing, right? This approach of a vet that wants to learn themselves. So like our vet, she sees things. She has clients with dogs coming in. We tell her stuff that we heard about or we saw or something happened. Like there's stuff that she's never seen in her probably, I would guess about 2 decades of experience, So you want a vet that has that interest and hunger to learn, because they know, the good vets, they know they have things to learn. And this is where there's an interesting dynamic that happens, because when I'm looking for the vet for our new puppy owner in their area, and I happen to call them, there are some vets that I would introduce myself, tell them I am we're a breeder, and we have a person that purchased a puppy from us that's in your area, and so we're looking for a vet to recommend them. And on certain occasions, there were vets that would just refuse to have any conversations with me whatsoever, right? Which is, again, it's going to be a huge filter. I do understand where they're coming from. It's definitely, you can explain why they have this attitude, because I'm not going to be the owner of the dog and I'm a breeder. Their attitude comes from the fact that most breeders are, in fact, for the most part, utterly incompetent, and they will give their owners like straight up medical advice, right? We stay away from giving medical advice to our owners. We do things in terms of process. We tell them this is how it needs to be done, as a process to diagnose things, or how, what the schedule for vaccinations or something, right? It's not exactly medical advice, but there are plenty of breeders that will just think they know what they're talking about. And I can imagine those kind of people trying to say that to a veterinarian on behalf of like their owner, and the veterinarian has nothing to just laugh, because the things that I've heard breeders say is ridiculous. Right? So, but this is where that curiosity is going to come from a decent vet. They know that there are some breeders that are very good, and so they're not going to cut off that communication prematurely just because a person is a breeder. Once they figure out that the breeder is a moron, then yeah. And so that is only going to come from, again, that experience of the vet having practiced, veterinary care for like 2 decades. They would have met a handful of good breeders somewhere, and they probably learned something from those breeders, unless they're breeders themselves. So that that innate curiosity and openness, I think, is something that is definitely important to see in a veterinarian. So when we look at the website, I want to some vets, vet hospitals or vet clinics that I've seen during these searches, they're doing a very good job, even in terms of presentation of their services. They will most vets that are PennHip certified, they're going to be talking up the fact that they're PennHip certified. They're going to be talking also about some other certifications that they may have. There are actually, surprisingly, there isn't one here locally, but I've seen in other parts of the country where a vet is practicing, like he's the clinic owner and he's practicing as a general practitioner, but he's also a specialist, right? So that, of course, is going to give more points to the vet in terms of potentially being a hopefully at the very least okay vet, but maybe even a good vet. Those qualifications at the end of the day, I think, do matter. There are definitely specialists that are no good, without question, and we've encountered such specialists too. So you can't rely on any one of these filters on their own, but we have to compound them together. So another thing that is pretty easy to ask is, whether they have a blood test machine. So oftentimes, blood chemistry is something that even still nowadays, most veterinarian places that will have to send it out to a lab, but at least like CBC they can do in-house. But there are veterinary facilities now that even do blood chemistry tests on site. So where you will have your blood test results within, half hour instead of days. That is something that I would definitely pay attention to during these searches. If I find that kind of vet, I'm going to lean towards that vet. Of course, going back to the fundamentals, right? If a vet, I wouldn't sort of translate this over to any kind of veterinary staff at the hospital, but the vet specifically, right? If the vet is pushing spay or neuter for your dog, I would run. I would not be seeing that vet. Sometimes, you know, with the staff, right, they always ask you, like, is your dog spayed or neutered, kind of thing. Some of them may even, like, out of their own volition, like, start pressing you to do that. So keep in mind, right, just because you happen to find a vet that you trust, that trust should never translate over to the vet staff, unfortunately. That's another issue. One example of that was there was a dog that had medication administered while at the vet's office by the vet, and then the vet's assistant came into the room before leaving, and basically brought over a bag of the medication, and told us that we need to, like, give this medication when we get home, and basically added on another dose that shouldn't have been there because it was already administered by the vet, right? And so you have to be careful. You know, people are not perfect. You have to be always approaching everything with you know, doubt, and just trust but verify those things. When it comes to any kind of medication from veterinarians, right, immediately look up the name of the medication online, look what the correct dosage is, look for because usually it's going to be per weight, right, for per pound or per kilo, what the correct dosage is, correct frequency. You know, most drugs are either 12-hour or 24-hour administration. Duration, you know, if it's an antibiotic, you don't want to stop before 7 days. Even if the dog looks completely normal after 3 or 4 days, you cannot stop prematurely any kind of administration of antibiotics. That's why there are all these resistant bacterial strains that are mutating, that exist in mass in the US and across the world. This overuse of antibiotics and prematurely stopping antibiotics will make that bacteria that has survived the initial 3 or 4 days stronger and possibly resistant in the future to this antibiotic that was being used. So then your dog might actually get worse again because the infection wasn't completely cured, and you have to do another treatment, and then that antibiotic may not even work anymore. So with one second. Yeah, I mean, spaying and neutering, it's a total no-go, right? We're so protective of our owners and their dogs. If it's a vet that doesn't have this fundamental understanding of the damage that spaying and neutering can do and will do to the overall health of the dog forever, that's not them practicing medicine. You know, that's mutilating a dog with a redundant surgery that it just is completely not necessary with zero upside. You also will have to, whatever vet you might find, right? Like you have to feel it out for several visits, I think. And if you experience leaving the office after some kind of a visit where there was an issue that needed to be addressed, and it felt like, you know, the vet said things to you, their mouth moved, maybe they gave you some medication, but then you leave the office and then you get in the car and you get the sense of like, I don't really understand what the plan is. I don't know what's next for the dog. You know, that is not the experience you should be having. You should have a very clear plan. The vet should be explaining to you what to expect and what not to expect, right? In terms of if something what the vet is expecting for the dog to be going through as a result of whatever the vet just did, and what must be done as contingencies if the vet happens to be wrong, right? If whatever medication is not working, they should be telling you that these are going to be the red flags. If these things happen, you need to call, because that might mean the medication not working. And so there's just sometimes it's just like very surreal experiences that people have. You know, and then like it can create an example of that would be, you know, if you bring in your dog in that is limping on walking on 3 legs, can't even set 1 foot down because of, you know, whatever might have happened to the dog, and the vet looks at the dog and gives you 2 days worth of anti-inflammatory and sends you on your way home. You know, you're trying to think like, what the hell did just happen? This dog is still undiagnosed, and we just got anti-inflammatories, right? It just doesn't make any sense. So always go with your gut. I think that's also really important. You know, sometimes it's going to be pretty difficult for you to defeat this, I think, cultural conditioning, cultural pressure that people have in terms of being taught to just blindly trust a medical professional. You really need to fight that. So if in a given visit you are having like you're just not feeling right about the situation, right? You're feeling something in your gut that it just doesn't all add up. In that kind of a situation, I think that asking for answers and questioning the vet about it potentially could even be counterproductive, because, you know, you're feeling that way because something was already done incorrectly to begin with. Something wasn't explained to you, right? Something is not adding up to you. And I mean, you're still a person with a brain, you know. It's, again, these things can all be boiled down to, without any use of medical terms or anything, and explained in simple layman's terms, layman's language. And that's how the vet should be speaking with you about anything that's happening with the dog. So if you have this gut instinct that something is just not adding up, something is just really weird, I would leave. Because if you start asking, I would just leave the vet and just try to find another vet. Because if you start asking questions in that kind of situation, what might happen is they will convince you to stay, right? They will give you some kind of a half-baked response just to sort of satisfy you. And then you feel like you've gone through those motions of, oh yeah, so, okay, so I had these concerns and the vet listened to me and the vet responded to me. So now, okay. But it's sort of, you know, it's an urge that you're trying to satisfy there to like continue with that conditioning, rather than going with your gut. So that, right, like, whatever kind of filtering you do, and another thing that I always ask for our owners when looking for a vet is about their vaccination policy, right? The thing I care most about, as far as vaccines go, is specifically rabies vaccine. I ask, when like, will they administer a vaccine at 3 months old, right? If a vet says that is when we recommend that the rabies vaccine be administered, you know, that is just, you've probably struck a gold mine there. Because most vets will say, no, it has to be at 4 months old. Most vets will do that. Some vets, they'll say, yeah, I mean, we can do it at 3 months. And that's good enough for me. If they say, yes, we'll do it at 3 months, that's fine. You know, I was drafting a little bit of notes prior to this meeting here. We had an owner relatively recently, you know, in their area. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a PennHip certified vet, and so I was you know, looking for some other factors and qualifications. And I suggested this vet to the owner, and of course I still warn them, you know, this does not mean it's going to be a normal vet. You still have to be always very careful, very responsible owner. And the owner started asking about their vaccine practices, right? Like, you know, he even started asking about like how do they store the vaccines, which is great, I think, timing of the vaccine administration and all those kind of things. And out of nowhere, he told me the vet brought up the fact that dogs are considered property. Like in that conversation, and it was like he was like completely blindsided, but because the way that he was explaining to me, it didn't follow the conversation for her to bring up the fact that dogs are considered property. But when I heard that, I told him, yeah, like don't go to that vet. And so because the vet actually refused to administer rabies vaccine at 3 months old to that pup, for that visit, he left without having anything done. And then later that day, I learned that from him. And that vet categorically told him, like, I don't care what your breeder says, right? And she was young. She was a young vet. So one thing I want to cover, this is obviously all these discussions about veterinary malpractice and common problems with vets. There are also, pretty common problems with pet owners that really contribute to a lot of these things, I think. There is going to be a certain, in certain situations, I have empathy for vets that have to deal with certain types of owners where, you would bring the dog in to the vet, and whatever the problem might be, the vet, that wants to help is going to start asking questions like, when did this start? What kind of medications has this dog had? What is the dog eating? Like those kind of things. And the owner just doesn't know or doesn't care, right? Like, oh, I don't remember when it started, like a couple months ago or what have, like those things. I can imagine, like, if I were in that veterinarian's position, I would be so frustrated, because this is the biggest difference, I think, between human medicine and veterinary medicine. The patient can't tell you anything. So it is the responsibility of the owner to speak on behalf of the patient and provide as much information as possible to the vet. So what we recommend to our owners is you maintain a journal of critical information on a timeline of things that happen to the dog throughout the course of the dog's life, especially puppyhood, because there's a lot of changes that happen in a dog when it's a puppy. So just keeping a list on a timeline of any kind of scheduled medication to give you, right? Deworming medication, with the flea and tick medication, vaccination days, what kind of vaccines were provided, but then also, right, any change of anything that the dog eats, right? And so that doesn't mean just the food that you're giving the dog. If the dog like ate a stick and you saw the dog do that and you can get it back out, you document that, right? And then with a date of when it happened, because when it comes to actually diagnosing an issue, all that information is absolutely invaluable. That is the process that we go through with our owners before they go to a vet. If there's a need to go to the vet, I ask them for all this stuff, and then I ask them, like, this is what you need to tell the vet. And oftentimes, right, it's not all there. There's a lot of missing information, and sometimes it's like pulling teeth. And so it's very easy to understand that side of the veterinarian where it's kind of hopeless a little bit from that perspective, to where they probably just even stopped giving up or just gave up on asking those questions, because usually the answer is like, oh, I don't know, I don't remember. So if you are prepared for that visit, be your dog's advocate and have that information with you, like on a piece of paper, print it out on a timeline. Anything that preceded whatever might be happening to the dog, anything and everything you can think of. And just, don't give it to the receptionist, give it to the vet when they walk in. When you see the vet and say, this is what has been, this is what's happened, a vet will have like total respect for you for doing that too, because you're helping them do their job. And that will, right, it has this part, right, obviously it doesn't change any of the other stuff we talked about, how like vets don't even practice diagnostic method for the most part time. That's a separate issue. But this kind of information will help the vet really narrow down and set the priority order of the diagnostics to do, in what order. It will probably save you a ton of money too, right? Because they're going to be able to potentially exclude a lot of diagnostics that might be very costly, that they will not think are necessary to do first, given the information you've provided them. So that is something, right? As a dog owner, vets are also, people, they will make mistakes. You want to be there to catch those mistakes if it's something that's within your purview, right? That's why you always want to research any kind of medications that are being prescribed. Do all that before it's administered to the dog. Look at the side effects, look at the warnings. Ask your vet those questions. Here it says, so as an example, right? If a medication says, if it says the instructions for medication say you got to give it with food, chances are it's because, it might make the dog a little more nauseous. If you don't, it's a little hard, or it hits the liver or the kidneys pretty hard, right, in terms of having that drug metabolized. So usually it's going to be kidneys and or liver that metabolize these medications that are oral, that are systemic. And if you give it with food, so you would first feed the dog, then give it after you fed the dog, so that it takes much longer to enter the system, so that you're spreading out the introduction of the drug into your system a little bit over the time frame. Same thing with water, right? Any kind of drugs that are known to hit the organs harder than others, like even the typical anti-inflammatory for dogs, right? Rimadyl, carprofen, generic. It can hit I think it's the kidneys pretty hard. So if that kind of medication is prescribed, you want to ensure you definitely give it after food, but also just like make your dog drink a ton of water if they don't really do it themselves. Especially if you have like a sick dog. Sometimes sick dogs, they don't want to drink water, they don't have appetite or what have you. If there's like layered conditions that are happening, and you have to give an anti-inflammatory like that, right? You want to protect your dog's organs through these very simple things. Because again, the dog can't tell you my stomach hurts because you gave it to me on an empty stomach. So be the advocate for your dog when you come to see the vet, and take that responsibility for being your dog's spokesperson as to what happened when seeing the vet. So that will definitely help you get the best veterinary care you can as well. Those good vets, they will really, really appreciate this serious approach from a pet owner. And I imagine they seldom ever see it. It's got to be very rare that it's done by owners. So that I wonder, so Scott, did I cover in terms of like looking for a good vet? Anything I missed, anything you want me to?
Well, I've been taking notes, and I guess if you can find a PennHip certified breeder that's got 10 to 15 years experience, hunger to learn, and has a lab on site, and they don't push spays or neuters, you got the perfect vet, right?
Yeah, I mean,
What?
chances are it's going to be a very good vet. And again,
Yeah,
like, right, if a vet is a breeder, I mean, there's no chance they're going to be telling you, like, suggesting that you spay or neuter your dog,
right.
right? They might say it's your decision.
Yeah, yeah.
They're not going to say do it just
No,
because, right?
I think
Unless the dog has some kind of a condition.
I think that there's a great list, a great criteria list, Igor, for everyone out there. I hope they were taking notes. Of course, they can watch this again and get all the information. But I think that's really, really terrific. All these points that you made.
Mhm.
And
So
Definitely.
something as little as
Colleen.
like taking, the medication after eating, like those little details that
Mhm.
like I, as a pet owner, my dog does, does that. I didn't know that. And I feel like that's such an important little thing that I could be doing to help, prevent him from getting sick from eating and
Mhm.
all that. So yeah, like it's amazing. I wasn't aware of how much responsibility came down to the individual companion parent doing the research beforehand, because you really have to be, like you said, the advocate and be the one who speaks up and like takes charge of the conversation, because like they don't have a voice. So yeah, it's all about educating yourself, staying aware, and then finding a good veterinarian who can support that mission.
Mhm. Yeah, the more I've been thinking about that, I also think that there's, and again, this is separate from like veterinary malpractice, just veterinary malpractice. There's absolutely no excuse for it. But in terms of like getting like the best care you can get, I think a lot of vets, they're gonna be just jaded
Mm.
through having suboptimal experiences with pet owner after pet owner after pet owner, where the owners are making their jobs way more difficult than they need to be. Like, if a vet asks something about the past history of the dog, when you're bringing the dog in and you say I don't remember, what are they going to do with that, right? They're not going to keep asking, well, can you look it up? Surely it should be in your emails, or right, like, they don't have time for that either. And
Mm.
what is the person's assumption going to be at that point? Like, the owner doesn't really care that much, because if they did, they would have this information. So in terms of maximizing the care that you will get from the vet, being prepared for that visit, to where doing this all off of memory, it's just impossible. That's why if you keep a journal, what I do, right, anytime, like, for example, even if like a dog has a loose stool, I will document it on my calendar. Like, so and so had loose stool, right? So and so, like, for like whatever the symptoms are that are not normal, just put it on your calendar on your phone, right? That instant. Take photos of stuff, as well. Take videos. If you see like somehow like your dog is not moving the way the dog like was moving yesterday, something has changed, immediately document it. And if you have it, and you can just use a keyword, right? Like whatever your dog's name is, followed by whatever is happening. And then you go to the calendar on your phone, there's your timeline. You enter your dog's name and everything will show up in chronological order as to what has happened. Changed food from this to this on so-and-so date. Bought these treats, right? Most treats, they're just like straight up dangerous. Any kind of treats that you buy at the store or online for your dog, they're going to be potentially extremely harmful to the health of your dog. I mean, there's a bunch of dog food too that will kill your dog that's sold, so with that in mind, right, like, you want to have a list of all those things that are introduced into the dog dog's diet, any medications, any changes on behavior, any changes in urination, like somehow you notice like over the past few days the dog is drinking less than it used to. Just write that down. Then you have like a full record, and that will be to like a vet that actually wants to help you. That will be invaluable information.
So, Igor, let me ask you a question. If you can remember back to the time when you and your wife first became involved in breeding, and the state of veterinary medicine back then compared to now, do you ever remember a time where the conversation and the comments you just made in the last hour or so would not be applicable? Was there a time where veterinarians were more, what word do I don't want to say the word caring.
Yeah. So, so my wife, Olga, she started breeding in Moscow, in Russia. She's from Russia in 2000. So I've been involved with this since now 2015. So I've only been involved with this for 7 years with her.
Okay.
So our experience with US vets started in 2015 for 7 years now. Her experience with having had that prior experience with vets in a country like Russia and Moscow, I mean, their approach is just very stark. Of course, there are bad vets there too. I mean, it's everywhere, right? But it's a completely different proportion. So there's just a different approach to medicine. It's going to start with diagnostics rather than guesses, and prescriptions based on guesses, right? That's the biggest, I think, key phrase to remember is never receive a prescription based on a guess, right? They can guess, and that guessing is important to establish a diagnosis because that will give them the prioritized list of what kind of diagnostics to conduct, right? Like, so for example, if there is some kind of dog with symptoms that could be indicative of brain tumor, vitamin D deficiency, or just random like intestinal blockage, or whatever, like different things might be causing these things. You don't want your vet to go off with the brain scan MRI first and spend $4,000 on that, right? You want to exclude the other things, whatever they might be. That priority, that's an example of like a very stark difference, like for example, in terms of pricing and these things. This is just a completely made up scenario, but that is in reality how veterinarians are practicing. They're supposed to be practicing diagnostic medicine. They want to check for certain different things. Obviously, if a person doesn't have enough money to pay for all the things the vet wants to test, they're only going to test for the things that they think are the most likely. Especially that's going to come into play where providing as much background information to the vet is going to be very helpful to hopefully getting that diagnostics that the dog needs. With us, like, if there's an actual situation where we need to run some diagnostic, right? Like money is no object, so we'll just do all those things that we can perceive to be distinct probability, right? We're not going to do some random stuff just because. We will still exclude a ton of things. We don't want to just randomly test for things that are not necessary, but there's going to be that prioritized list of things that must be done. And they keep in mind, right? The vet is going to keep in mind, like, so if we do this diagnostic test, we're only going to get an answer in 3 weeks. If we do this diagnostic test, we'll have the answer in 30 minutes, whether the dog is positive or not, right? That's, time frame and cost is probably going to be the things that they're going to be focusing on. And any information that you can provide the vet, that's going to be helpful to creating that list. of diagnostic and the order and priority.
Okay, cool.
I have a question, and if any of our viewers have questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat. We'll be sure to take a look at them. But while they do that, so you mentioned a couple times, and even in some past episodes, just being aware of the food and the treats and what to look out for, what to avoid. Are there any professional sites or different assets that you can direct people to when they're doing their research that you believe is a more trusted, viable source than just like the randomness of the internet?
Yeah. For dog food, none. For treats, also none.
Okay.
So for example, what we found to be safe is it's bully sticks, especially for dogs that are teething, right? For puppies, it's great. But even for adult dogs, they love it. So bully sticks are what they are. They have a cute name, but it's a penis that's dried out from a bull. There are, of course, going to be different bully stick companies, manufacturers, brands. The one that we've had sort of an appreciation for that seems to work and it seems safe and we've never had any issues with is a Cadet brand.
Okay.
It's often sold at Costco. So I mean, sometimes we would load up and like purchase like $400 or $500 worth of these bully sticks at Costco because they're gonna last a really long time, and so we have hundreds and hundreds of bull penises at home. Another one, and this is really especially for it's great for puppies that are teething because they always need to be occupy themselves, otherwise they're gonna start shredding your house. So another one that we like, it's called 1 second. Okay, I found it. So it is chicken jerky, and it's called Farmland Traditions, and it's also sold at Costco, oddly enough. And what you will notice, right, is that both of these, you can call them treats, they don't have anything beside that product. So in the case of the chicken jerky, it's only made of chicken. There's nothing else. That is how you definitely want to look for something that is more likely to be safe for your dog. Many of these treats, they'll say whatever, like beef or chicken or what have you, and then you look at the ingredients list, it's not just chicken or just beef. It is, I don't know, rice, potato, flour, like all kinds of things processed together to make it look like chicken. So in terms of treats, right, the best thing for a dog is meat. There's nothing better than meat. So just stick to it. Beef is by far the best protein for a dog. If you really want to treat your dog, go buy like a block of 20-30 pound block of shoulder beef meat. Ask the store, hopefully it's like more of a butcher type of place, or if you're in a rural area, you want to be careful also with sourcing with this stuff. But for example, here in Las Vegas, we have this chain of stores called La Bonita Supermarkets. So it's like a Mexican grocery store chain, and their supply chain appears to be completely different compared to the American chains like Albertsons and Kroger, what have you. So what they have is they also have a fridge in the back where you can buy that 20-30 pound piece of beef muscle meat, basically. That's relatively, you can cut off all the fat that's on the surface. That's vacuum sealed. You open it up, it smells like grass. It smells like pasture. So the time between you getting it and that cow having been butchered is much shorter because of that supply chain with these specific chain of grocery stores than the typical ones that we see around the US. So it's just much fresher meat, and you still have to protect your dog from pathogens in the meat. You know, I know there you can find articles, I'm sure, and people talking how, well, dogs can't get salmonella, so it doesn't matter, you can give them raw stuff. You know, it's just not true. They will get intestinal and infections, you know, digestive system infections from the stomach or intestine, what have you, from infected meat. And we've seen it happen in front of our eyes with this specific meat, right? That smells like pasture. You would think it's safe. And what we were doing is what Olga has been doing since her time back in Russia, where again, the supply chain for meat is completely different. So she was getting, she never had concerns with feeding her dogs their raw beef that she would purchase at the market, so long as she would freeze it for like 2-3 days. The reason you freeze it first is because you want to get rid of the parasites that might exist. So that freezing process will kill off the parasites. The problem is freezing does nothing to viruses or bacteria. So it cannot, that process, it does not affect those pathogen groups, right? So because of that, what happened here in the US when she was practicing her way of giving our dogs treats that are like the best level reward, right? And like just raw beef. We ended up giving like several dogs all at once after being fed this raw beef that was previously frozen by us, but then thawed back. Their poop all had blood in it. I mean, it wasn't severe, but it was clearly because of the meat, because it happened to all those dogs that ate that meat. When I called our vet at the time about it, before I even had a chance to tell me, he's like, did they eat raw meat? Right. And so I'm like, yes, I was about to tell you. He said, yeah. He says, it's really frequent. It happens all the time. And so in that instance, they had to, I think it was metronidazole, right? So it's an antibiotic that is very, very effective for intestinal infections. So, and you know, the dogs healed very quickly. That bacteria, we killed it off. But as a result of that, we have a different protocol now. When we do that, we cut that the raw beef into cubes. They're going to be edible size, and we throw those cubes into boiling water for like 20-30 seconds and mix it around, and then get it out of the water so that it's like tartar. So the surface is cooked, inside is raw. Because ideally you want to give your dog raw beef because it's just gonna have much better nutrition. You know, it's much better for the dog than like cooked stuff. But with this, usually there are exceptions, but usually bacteria is going to live on the surface. They're not going to penetrate the meat. So that's the extent to which, you know, we go through you know, protecting our dogs from those kind of things. But if you're talking about like the best treat, so for example, in the professional dog world, right, the highest level reward treat is going to be beef liver. So beef liver also, I mean, it's cheaper than meat. It's like $2 a pound. You can get like a huge piece of beef liver, and then you can bake it in the oven once it's cut into long strips. So you bake those strips in the oven, and then you can dice it up into like small cubes or pieces. Dogs will go crazy for it. This is what professionals use. Professional dog handlers will use this as a very high level reward for the dog, and it's very nutritious and it's extremely healthy. But there is a problem of wanting to give a dog too much of a good thing. It is so rich so that the dog will start having all kinds of, I mean, it can have like a skin outbreak, it's gonna have like diarrhea, it can have all kinds of things if you just feed the dog liver all the time, right? So, I mean, there was a story like, a person decided to feed their dog 1 cup of beef liver a day. I mean, that's like that's 8 ounces of beef liver. I mean, that's just insane. You can't do that. So you can go through those kind of treatment regimens, like muscle meat doesn't matter. I mean, you can go crazy with that. I mean, give them as much as they want. But some of these organs you want to be more careful of, right? I mean, and there's also a lot of diversity that you can give. All these organs, right? Like beef heart is great. Beef lips, tripe is the intestines, right? Like all that stuff is the dog is gonna love you for it. The dog is gonna have a great time. That is the best treat. It's gonna be a better treat than anything you can buy in the store. That's a processed treat, and it's healthy.
Cool. Good. All right, I think we're going to wrap for tonight, Igor. I think we are going to miss you for the next 2 Friday nights. And then if you're available, we'll see you 3 Friday nights from now. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Okay. Thanks for all your knowledge. I mean, it's very interesting. And I hope the majority of people are always asking, what do we look for to find a quality vet? And you outlined it very well. I would say you did a great job. Thank you. Yeah.
As final thoughts, don't if in case you're watching and you can't find a vet that meets that criteria in full, right? Know that that's also very possible, and it's not that uncommon. It's just that there's just not that many vets in your area that are qualified. And so then just take extra care. You have to take your dog to the vet for random things. You have to take your healthy dog to a vet at least annually, So just keep your eyes and ears open when you're taking that dog on your visit. Don't let them take your dog out of sight. It's your dog.
Cool. Absolutely. It's your family. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. We'll see you Sunday night for Veterinary Tales. We'll see Igor in 3 weeks. And everyone have a good night. Thanks, Igor.
Thank you.
Have a good night, Scott, Colleen.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.